In less than a week, BC is choosing its next provincial government. Actually, the election has already started. Advance voting was this weekend, and many of you probably chose to get mail-in ballots because, of course, the COVID pandemic. For that same reason, the BC government, under John Horgan and the NDP, have decided to hold its election 1 year early. Whether or not you think that's a good idea, I'll leave up to you, but like it or not, the election is here, and there's a lot to talk about. I made a much longer, hour-long video covering the history of the parties, the party leaders, and a more in-depth analysis of these policies. This video is just a short summary of the longer one. It's actually at the end of the longer one. So if you find yourself wanting more info, I recommend you check that one out. So the parties actually have a lot in common this election. So I think it's really important for you to personally gauge the parties and leaders on an emotional level. Who do you trust to best and most faithfully implement their platform? Who do you think will prioritize the needs you care about when difficult decisions have to be made? And who do you think will most act in accordance with your values when something new and unexpected, like, I don't know, a global pandemic occurs? And again, there are some minor parties who might win a seat or two, but unless you're looking for a protest vote or you absolutely love the specific candidate, I don't think you should vote for these parties. They're just not big enough players. Back to policies, let's go from the top. All the parties are pretty much in agreement on how to handle COVID itself, so no reason to decide your vote there. As far as financial benefits go, if you remember, the NDP and Greens are much more interested in direct financial contributions to you and your family. The Liberals are more focused on creating jobs through infrastructure projects. Although, as we saw, all the parties will be investing in these sorts of projects. So the real decision is, would you prefer a check in the mail or no sales taxes on your purchases for a year? If you chose check in the mail, do you want the BC NDP plan for a one-time big check for most people, or the Green plan of a smaller, reliable monthly income program for people with low to no income? Moving on, all parties are in agreement on helping businesses pay their leases, and they're all concerned with getting all of our industries back on track. And they also agree about the healthcare response to COVID, although the Liberals are the only party to support free flu shots, in addition to the eventually free COVID vaccine. As far as hospitals and healthcare go, all the parties like the NDP's work on building new hospitals and reducing wait times, and would do more or less the same thing. The Liberals would also focus on rural ambulance services, so that might be important to you too. As far as seniors go, all parties are in support of more services, especially at-home care. The main difference, remember, was whether or not you think we should switch to a completely public model, like the NDP, a public or non-profit model, like the Greens, or if we should keep our private model, but just regulate it a little more, like the Liberals. And finally for healthcare, the NDP and Greens are the party to vote for if you want to see universal pharmacare, although that depends on federal support too. As for mental health, all parties support making services more accessible, especially in schools. The NDP would even reopen places like Riverview. There are a few nuances here, but I think this really comes down to how much you care about this topic and how much you trust the parties to do the work. On the opioid crisis and addiction, the NDP and Greens are all in on harm reduction. They want to stop deaths with decriminalization and more safe injection sites. Empathy is their guiding principle here. The Liberals aren't necessarily against this, but their main growing concern right now isn't the safety of people using drugs, but the safety of the communities. So, on policing and police reform, all parties support ramping up our social work and mental health services to take on some of the work that police are doing right now. The Liberals, though, because of their homelessness concerns, are the most open to more funding and more cops, although many of them would be unarmed. The Greens are most open to moving police funding to other services and rethinking the scope of what we want police officers' role to be, and the NDP are somewhere in the middle. On housing, the NDP and Greens are most focused on supportive and public housing, as well as renters, while the Liberals are most focused on market prices and property owners. There's a lot of nuance and detail here, so I recommend you go back and watch that section, but that's the general gist. On childcare, all parties are supportive of the NDP's $10 a day childcare pilots and expansions. The Liberals, though, are a little more hesitant on the cost front, and would add some means testing. So if your household makes more money in a year, you'd be paying up to $30. The Greens would do the opposite and make preschool age care free and provide benefits for stay-at-home parents and working parents. For schools, all the parties' plans are more or less the same. The NDP and Greens would implement a meal plan, and the NDP have been increasing funding for school supplies and playgrounds, and the Liberals would like more focus on trades, jobs, and apprenticeships for post-secondary. On infrastructure, the parties are mostly on the same page. The Liberals would restart the Macy Tunnel Replacement Bridge project, and probably one of their biggest policies, they would allow for more private competition for auto insurance. They'd leave ICBC in place for those who need it and to keep the market in check, but if you'd rather go somewhere else, you'd be free to do so. The NDP are super supportive of local governments and their planning and transit, especially the Mayor's Council in Metro Vancouver. They've gone all in on new rapid transit projects, which all parties now support, and got rid of bridge tolls. And finally, the Greens would like to create something like the Mayor's Council or even TransLink in Greater Victoria. The NDP and Liberals support widening Highway 1 and the LNG pipeline, while the Greens don't support either for environmental reasons. Instead, they'd use that money for an income and jobs guarantee to help oil and gas workers transition to a new trade. And more on climate, all the parties want to meet our emissions targets. The Liberals are more open to slowing down the carbon tax in the midst of COVID, while the Greens would like to ramp up our targets. All the parties are in support of our lumber industry, especially to start building mass timber towers. The NDP, and especially the Greens, care more about biodiversity in our forests, while the Liberals think of forests more like a crop business. That same thinking applies to all of our other resource industries. Notably, the NDP would create a bond program to make sure natural resource projects would be on the hook for environmental cleanup costs, even if they go out of business. And the Liberals and Greens support protecting and expanding wetlands. As far as the gig economy goes, the NDP are predictably focused on labor and workers' benefits, while the Liberals are more focused on the effects of small businesses like restaurants. And finally, on reconciliation, all the parties would like to move forward to more long-term, reliable agreements rather than short-term contracts. The NDP made the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples law, and the Liberals are worried about clarifying exactly how that would work. The NDP have also done a lot on language revitalization and cultural funding, while the Greens are focused on righting a lot of past wrongs. They'd transfer control of child welfare to Indigenous groups and try to increase energy and wealth independence. And that's everything. Again, there's a lot more agreement than disagreement here. Where the parties do differ, it's usually in pretty predictable ways. The NDP are a lot more supportive of social programs like childcare and social housing than the previous Liberal government. The current Liberals, though, have come around to support a lot of these new NDP projects, but overall are more focused on helping people through tax and cost cuts, like the sales tax and ICBC. Compared to the NDP and Greens, they're a lot more focused on the middle and upper class range, while the NDP is almost entirely focused on lower and working classes, especially in housing. As for the Greens, they're predictably a lot more all-in on environmental protections and speeding up our climate targets. On the social and economic front, they'd actually expand the NDP's programs even more. They're especially fond of income programs and co-ops. They probably won't win enough seats to implement these major expansions, so if you're voting for them here, it's more so they can act as a strong opposition voice for these issues. Alright, I know this was a long one. I'm sorry I'm a little late. I hope it was worth it though, and it all makes sense. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you'd share this video with friends and family, ring the like button, smash the subscribe bell, and give me your social insurance number and mother's maiden name on Patreon. And if you're a long-term viewer, or even a former Patreon supporter, that municipality region map tour video I promised a long time ago will be coming out soon. I'm also working on a multi-hour history series for Vancouver and BC, and didn't want to release that municipality video too soon and miss out on any fun facts that I could include. Anyway, thanks for watching.